The presenters tonight are Margot Griswold with Jonathan Coffin. Margot has presented to this group several times in the past, and we always have new experience and educational experience, and I suspect that tonight won't be any different. Margot has over 27 years experience in habitat restoration and soils, landscape position, and hydrology, coupled with existing and historic vegetation, guide her work in restoration. She's done work in consensus planning for plant and wildlife habitat within the habitat work group of the Owens Lake Control Project in Inyo County, California. She's past president of the Society for Ecological Restoration, California, and the Los Angeles Audubon Society. Jonathan Coffin, who most of us know, is a naturalist and a photographer of exceptional talent. He's dedicated decades to photographing the biodiversity of the Ballona Wetlands and verifying his discoveries with other scientists. He can be found day or night documenting the wildlife, plants, animals from the edges of the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. So with that said, Margot, screen share.
Okay.
And it's up to you. Let her rip.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, and thank you again for having me and Jonathan. I know you never get tired of seeing Jonathan's amazing photographs, and I hope that I can do justice to your asking me back again. Actually, this evening I'll be trying to show inconsistencies and overlooked opportunities for the Ballona Wetlands. So you've heard these things before from various members of the Airport Marina group and other scientists. And I'm just trying to pull the threads together to see, can we convince the proponents for the plan, for the final EIR for the Ballona project, can we convince them to join us in a facilitated stakeholder process and reach a consensus? Right here, I'm showing you Jonathan's most recent, here on the left of the screen, the Crotch's bumblebee. So this is a threatened species listed in California, sour fig. And Jonathan just found this today and had it verified. He's gone back in his records from 2005 that he saw it there. It's also been recognized in the 1980s Schreiber report. And so this is the persistence. This is why we care about a good plan for the Ballona Wetlands, because these species persist, like the Tongva persists as a people, so does the wildlife. And here we have a sweat bee visiting a laurel sumac, up close photo. So let me see if I can, no. There we go. So I would like to also acknowledge the Gabrielina Tongva peoples. This is their land, their traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory. And so we need to remember that. And I believe their word, or one of their words for this area is, it is full of water. And so I'll start with the inconsistency of the final EIR with the surface and groundwater hydrology and the historical ecology of the Ballona Wetlands. The EIR is inconsistent. Their plan is inconsistent with what we know. The plan really hasn't changed much, as we saw if you attended the UCLA symposium, the URSA symposium last Tuesday afternoon. The plan really hasn't changed much since the mid-2000s. And it looked tired then, and it's more tired now. There are inconsistencies, and there are real opportunities to make this a better plan. So, in terms of stakeholders and the territory of the Gabrielino Tongva were invisible as well. The Tongva were invisible. To my knowledge, John Tommy Rosas, who is direct identified as a descendant of the Tongva, and made many presentations. And I encourage you to look at the airport marina presentations that he made when he was alive. And still, there was no change to the plan. There has been limited stakeholder community involvement overall, not just from the indigenous people's point of view, but from everyone in the community. There were a few meetings, but mostly once the Science Advisory Panel was named, it was a top-down type of system. They would meet and then they would report. And there were opportunities for some comment, but not in a way that was acknowledged. So the plan remains the same, despite community input to the contrary and recent science. The current plan you're likely mostly aware of. Here is, this orangey color is all termed upland or non-tidal. I find it weird. There's a lot of upland that they're carving out here. And then you see their romantic idea of a creek that never actually came that far. Ballona Creek generally stopped here at Lincoln and then spread out, and mostly Area A, and spread throughout. Now, keep in mind that the Ballona Wetlands included what is now Marina del Rey, and all the way the Grand Canal to Venice was wetland. It was an immense wetland. We've brought this up before. The plan, they term as a restoration, is not a restoration. Ecological restoration seeks to initiate or accelerate ecosystem recovery following damage, degradation, or destruction. And the goal of ecological restoration is to return a degraded ecosystem to its historic trajectory. History plays an important role in restoration, but contemporary conditions must be accounted for in planning. So let's look at the project in sort of each of these ideas. We know from the historical ecology of the Ballona Creek watershed that the Ballona Wetlands, for the most part, was a closed coastal wetland. In other words, it wasn't a full tidal wetland. It wasn't experiencing tides every day around the clock of the year. It would, on occasions of high runoff from the Los Angeles River, joining with the Ballona Creek, exhibit such strength that the dune system here on the west portion would be broken through by the river to the ocean. And then, as described by the classification of California estuaries, there's a natural closure pattern based on the direction of the wave actions, based on how much water is still coming from the creeks, and based on the strength of the sand being moved towards closure. And so, over most of its time, Ballona was a closed system. They had salt marshes, yes, salt marshes. There were freshwater, riparian, meadows. There was brackish water. These all existed within the large complex, and we're showing here the complex of the Ballona Wetlands, around 2,000 acres. What we're talking about right now is down here, just 600 acres. So this is what's been lost. We know from documents from 2011, and both these studies have been brought to the attention of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and other proponents of the project. However, they're given lip service and have not made an impact on the planning for the project. Dave Jacobs was part of the URSUS seminar symposium last week, and he gave an excellent, I thought, presentation on the closure patterns and how other lagoons have been opened unnaturally for full tidal, to become full tidal estuaries, and the problems that develops from sedimentation. He also showed that if you open Ballona up to a full tidal over the entire wetland, you may run into problems of deposition that would result in unplanned for actions in the wetland. Now, the historical ecology is, many different accounts assembled. It's a science. It's not just somebody's picking one small map like the T-sheets that are being used to drive the current plan. The historical ecology looks at a variety of historical maps, accounts, newspaper reports, diaries, etc., to assemble the likely historical ecology. And in this case, it was a particular time frame that they were looking at starting in the 1800s. So here's what we have. We know it well. Area A, Area B, north and south, and Area C. Dissected by roads, by the Ballona Flood Control Channel, and cut off from its water, its fresh water, by the dumping of pumped groundwater as well as rainwater being pumped actually out into Ballona Creek and not allowed to naturally come into the wetlands. So it's really being starved for years from its water. When I discussed the trajectory of an ecosystem in terms of restoration, the idea of history and what is also available in the region is often considered. And so if we look and what we know of lagoons south of Ballona and even north to the central California, except for Monterey Bay, San Diego Bay, most of the lagoon habitats, and this is from North San Diego County, this is a historical change. So we know there have been huge changes. And in salt marsh, there's been a 12% loss. In salt flats, such as the salt pan, 90%. Likely because people look at it and say, well, nothing, there's nothing there. But they're not looking at it from the point of view of the ostracods that are there or the birds that seek the ostracods. And open water mudflat historical acreage has increased 615%. Freshwater brackish wetlands have decreased 54%. So, and there's been a huge amount developed in contemporary times in these coastal wetlands. So you say, well, how did this open water mudflat increase so much when everything else is decreasing? Mainly through misguided projects, restoration that were needed for mitigation, for open water, for ports and other such activities, or for, nuclear power plants on our coast. So we want to look at that and say, do we want Ballona to be just like all the other lagoon habitat types, changing to a full tidal, jettied open, so the tide can come in, and along with that, maintenance issues of sedimentation? Or do we want to reclaim and restore, rehabilitate, and enhance what we find there now, which is fresh brackish wetlands, salt marsh, and salt flats? So this is an inconsistency I find with the project. So also, and I'm not the first to say this, so just so we're clear on this, I'm taking this from things I've read, other people's talks, and trying to kind of synthesize it together. Can't we look at all the other components that are pretty much tidal, that are within the old footprint of the Ballona Wetlands? The Ballona Lagoon, the Del Rey Lagoon down here in the center, the Oxford Lagoon, even the Grand Canal, even Marina del Rey. So some species, these are nurseries for aquatic species. Birds use these areas. And I think it's a missed opportunity for the plan not to consider the entire former wetland and what we can do. This is, an example of how these lagoons are linked. So the tidal organisms are here, and this is Jonathan's recent photograph of the semi-palmate sandpipers massing, getting ready to migrate, and they're feasting in the lagoons. And along the channel, also offering the Ballona flood control channel in this area, is a soft bottom. And here we have a great belted kingfisher. I believe it's a female. We know there are fish out there. We've seen sea lions feeding on fish. We've seen the fish for ourselves. We've seen the birds diving for the fish. So there are tidal waters and organisms already within the old Ballona Wetlands. Jonathan's photographed the tiger beetle, which is on the mudflats, and killifish over in Area A at the Fiji Slough. Fiji Slough with some egrets in the water, a missed opportunity. Why can't we use what we find in an efficient way? Opening up Area A and B north to tidal flows will not protect existing species against sea level rise. So here's Marina del Rey, open. Here's Area A, B, and C. So opening this up, if we're to believe the EIR, will protect the species from sea level rise. But this would be the only study I've found that proposes to dig out a wetland, coastal wetland, to protect it from sea level rise, to dig it out and make it lower than current sea level. So this seems to be an inconsistency. Within the document, they actually state that they'll remove between 2 and 3 million cubic yards, it's a lot, of soil. And they will use most of that soil to create large new levees and berms. But they reserve the right, and this is in a couple of studies that I've read from 2012 on to the current EIR. They reserve the right to actually use soil that they've taken out to put it back for building up the wetlands once they've allowed the ocean to come in. So to me, that's an inconsistency. Here's the plan, and these are the changes as we go through the years. Walter Lamb presented this in his presentation a few weeks ago, where you see the orange again is all upland. The light green is low marsh. Dark green is mid-marsh. Well, mid-marsh has gone to low marsh in just a few years, with sea level rise predicted. And it continues that way. Now, the low marsh is mudflat, and we continue with low marsh taking over high marsh. And finally, we're getting really less and less diverse in habitats as the mudflats take over. And here we are in 2100. So you see it's gone from our salt marsh, low, mid, and high, to open water and mudflat. And where did all the species go that were there? Well, the Belding Savanna sparrow that Jonathan captured here in Area B in the pickleweed likes to have a rather wide band to nest, to mate, nest, set up their territories. So that very narrow band that you see developing by 2050 means likely that we're not going to have Belding Savanna sparrow there. So we're not even protecting our one of our listed species. We certainly aren't protecting anything else. We're changing the entire system. To say nothing of the inconsistency with the state of California's groundwater management plans to allow saltwater intrusion into aquifers. And these aquifers were given short shrift in the final EIR, the draft EIR as well. No real hydrology studies were done. Hydraulic studies on the creek, but no real hydrology study, and they refer to a few studies, but they don't refer to some of the more recognized groundwater studies. So it's an inconsistency. Also, this is recent, just 2 Sundays ago, I saw the tsunami risk for Los Angeles County had been updated by the California Geologic Survey. And so I thought, oh, I wonder what that looks like for the Ballona Wetlands. So here we have Marina del Rey. So you see that it's all the boat slips and edges are at risk. So the yellow means at risk from tsunami. Here's the Ballona flood control channel. And so it's at risk up to just beyond the 90 and a little into the Centinela Creek. But you notice Area A, Area C, Area B is not at risk. But I think if we dig it out, as they did with Marina del Rey, remember, Marina del Rey was part of the wetland, part of the salt marsh. And this is what happens when you dig out a salt marsh, a coastal marsh, protected by a double dune system, and open it up to the ocean for tsunami. And I'm guessing sea level rise. Well, we saw that. In their own EIR, they projected what happens with sea level rise. But this is something I'm not sure they looked at in the document itself. But what are the risks to the wetlands and all the access paths and trails and such when a tsunami comes in once they've lowered this area? So it's just another inconsistency that I see. And inconsistency and missed opportunities in terms of water, rather than lowering the wetlands to receive tidal flow every day, why aren't we using the water that's there? So here we have seasonal rainfall. This is what Ballona looks like. We also have water that's being dumped, a tremendous amount of water that Patricia McPherson has documented is being dumped into Ballona Creek from the Playa Vista development in order to keep all their gas monitoring situations viable, and they dump that water out. But that water is an opportunity. That water should be in the Ballona Wetlands. And with that water, we could have, more vegetation, more opportunity for wildlife. This is just a photo that encapsulates a couple of inconsistencies with the final EIR. Besides the hydrology and vegetation is the baseline. So this was in 2012, Jonathan discovered these drains. If you look here in the left upper, where my pointer is, these drains are in the ground, so they're draining at the surface, but they're also draining about 6 feet down. They have weep holes on them, so they're draining any soil water. So this is a photo of the drain that's in the south area. These drains were not permitted. They were put in over 20 years ago. And so they've been draining. And this is what they base their existing conditions on this side. This is what I saw last year, 3 years after capping. This is pickleweed. Here we see a little pickleweed here. This is all annual grasses, all the way over to the berm. And here you see the berm in my photo. A little different lens than what Jonathan was using. So this came from the rainwater not being drained and the groundwater not being drained. So there's the opportunities we're talking about. And here's just where these unpermitted drains are in Area B, north. And Patricia McPherson again, the Coastal Commission acknowledged the drains had to be capped, and that thus they were capped. But one still wonders why those drains are there. They're draining, and they're joining the drain from the freshwater marsh that's taking the water from Playa Vista and dumping it into the Ballona Creek flood control channel. Why is the question? Why did they put these drains in? We've heard that they don't really drain anything, but I still have the question, that's a real inconsistency. I don't know very many people that would pay to have those drains put in if they weren't going to actually drain water. Another inconsistency is the placement of fill from Marina del Rey. And this is the basis for the project claiming they need to take this 2 to 3 million cubic yards of soil because all of A was covered in fill from the marina. Now remember that fill, that dredged material was good wetland soil placed in Area A. This is from a document of the Playa Vista EIR, and it shows the location of artificial or deposited fill. So these areas that are crosshatched is where the fill was. Undisputed that there's fill in Area C, but Area A, yes, there's some on the edges, but in general, this central area is not filled, and none in Area B. So I believe Dr. Dave Jacobs, commented on this briefly in his presentations, because this type of wetland that is closed is also perched, so it's higher than one would expect, and we think that they just have made an error here. But they're sticking with it. They're going to remove a lot of soil. and make large berms in place of what they already have, there are levees that hold the water from the Ballona flood control channel just fine. But they're going to make larger berms and tear up the whole place. This is Hordeum depressum, a rare grass found in wet meadows, coastal meadows. And Jonathan found this in the middle of Area A, where supposedly 10 to 20 feet of fill from the MARINA had been placed. So it needs low spots, meadow low spots to develop. So this is a species that was there. And it's inconsistent. The fact that Jonathan found it, the fact that there are documents that show there hasn't been all the fill they talk about. These are some linked inconsistencies. I call them linked. And they go to things we've discussed. They're claiming carbon sequestration will be greater with the full tidal habitats. At the symposium, there was a lot of vague talk, and I need to look into this, but I'm pretty sure that that's old data. And with all the new information about carbon sequestration and soils and what soil organisms and what the whole soil ecosystem brings to the table has not been considered. Nor has the time been considered.
You want me to try a porno?
That the carbon sequestration of functioning soils that they want to remove, that is going to cause a release of carbon. And they're not accounting for that. And I believe Walter Lamb mentioned that it could even be a negative. I don't think they'll ever recover once they move all that soil. And they're not considering if, in fact, the soil was rehabilitated and we had vegetation other than annual weedy species, if we had native perennial species, grasses, perennial grasses have incredibly deep roots, incredible soil micro fungi interactions. All of these contribute to carbon sequestration. And so it really wasn't analyzed, and it's an inconsistency. The document and plan didn't evaluate the full range of alternatives. They never really gave full view of a fresh, brackish, marsh, closed system alternative. And thus they compare Ballona in their California rapid assessment methods to entirely inappropriate systems of open water systems, open tidal systems. So, of course, Ballona comes out on the short end of that stick. So that's an inconsistency in its inappropriate use of CRAM. And they also equate the no project with no management. Rather than evaluating an alternative that enhances and rehabilitates with available hydrology and in relation to the region. So they just say, oh, no project, it'll get worse. Well, that assumes absolutely no management, which is just not reality. There has to be management. There's ample recent information, and in fact, the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences has published a study that the current biodiversity crisis is often depicted as struggles to preserve untouched habitats. But what you really find is there's been a deep cultural connection with biodiversity in all these habitats. It's been the colonialization and the extractive processes of that colonialization that has brought about the majority of the loss of biodiversity. And so it continues to have real world consequences, including failed policies of ecological restoration. And I think that's what we're seeing here. So we know all about the weeds. We know all about the maps of the weeds and how bad it's gotten since CDFW has taken over. But what they never tell you, and what Jonathan does tell you, is how much the area is used by wildlife. Here are the coyotes in Area A. Here are all the native species we're finding of plants in Area A, of butterflies, Lewis's evening primrose, another rare species, and the birds. We can't forget the birds. California thrasher, if you ever go down the bike path, he's often calling to you right off of Area A. The kites rest in Area A, and we have a triumvirate of species here in Area A.
So cute.
And here's a whole leck of male honey-tailed bees on laurel sumac. You see them all? Here they are, all congregating, getting ready to mate with the female. In Area B, we have the salt marsh bordered by riparian areas. We have a multitude of bird species, of skippers, the wandering skipper, monarch butterfly, sadly, not so many this year. And the salt flat, here are the ostracods I mentioned. Here are what the birds are after. So these little guys live in the salt pan, and they go dormant when it's dry, but as soon as the rain comes, they come alive, kind of like sea monkeys. And the birds are on the prowl. The salt pan is a big area for gathering prior to migration. In Area B, we've got alkali heath, or Frankinia, and wandering skipper there. The fiery sandhill skipper on alkali mallow. These are all native species. And here's the orb weaving spider. These are all out there. The short-eared owl on his rounds. And I just find that you're not going to see these species once they open it up and you have sea level rising and the low marsh gives way to mud flats and the mid marsh, finally the high marsh. You'll have levees, and the levees will be controlled by what you can put on those levees. So they won't be uplands like you see restored on the bluffs just south of Ballona. No, these levees will be very sparse, and they won't allow these ground squirrels to have anything to do with those levees. So what are they going to do to keep the ground squirrels from those levees. Here are the rabbits in some cressa, a native salt species. King snake. So we just have all these missed opportunities to maintain the biodiversity that exists, that persists, even in the face of all the indignities that Ballona has suffered. There are natural soils, there's natural hydrology, and there's existing vegetation, or we can restore to some historic vegetation. And clearly, there's existing wildlife. I'm going to hurry a little because it's getting late. Again, this is area A. Remember, this area is not fill. It's polystrene freshwater wetland. But we could have an opportunity with Fiji ditch to have something. These are all opportunities that we can look at. There's connections to area C we could develop. There's all type of things to consider if only we could all sit down together instead of being told top down what's going to happen. Here's Fiji ditch again. And here's all the citizens of the C area, the much maligned C area. There's a lot going on in the C area, including California gnatcatcher, a listed species, Lewis's evening primrose as well, horned larks, and the burrowing owl, a species of concern, as well as the monarchs, because there is and now I'm forgetting the name of okay, I'm getting old. Thank you, milkweed. Oh my goodness. And some more bird species. This is Jonathan's famous photograph. These are the stakes that were put in for the Annenberg complex that was proposed for Area C, and which would have paid for the restoration of the rest of Ballona, I believe. Luckily not happening. Buckeye on Coyote Bush. And here we have our gnatcatcher again on Saltbush. And let's not forget the ants. These are part of the soil ecosystem. So they're the ones we can see that come up and they're big enough we can see them. These are native Pocono myrmex seed collectors. They're going about their business. They're mighty. They're mighty ants. I've heard that opponents of the plan have been compared to ants. We're nothing but ants. Well, I'll take that. I think ants are pretty powerful. Here's rattlesnake weed, close up and from a view high up. So that's persisting. This is a native species, a euphorb in the area C. And Frankinia, alkali heath. So this is a plant I found in higher elevation areas near coastal areas. It's quite a robust species and it persists. So it gives us an indication of what's possible. Here's the Lewis's primrose again and the horned larks. Gopher snakes. We've had king snakes, gopher snakes, we have rattlesnakes, and side blotch lizards as well as this western fence lizard. Let's not forget access. There's an inconsistency because not only are they saying they're going to make Ballona resilient to sea level rise, and they're going to sequester more carbon, but they're going to give more access. They could give us that access now. Only a few groups have access, and it's very limited. currently, once a month, pre-COVID and hopefully soon, there's an open wetlands. It's very managed. People aren't allowed to go off on their own. They're given a tour with excellent docents. There are a couple of other groups that have events at the wetlands, and there are school groups that come to the wetlands, almost 2,300 students just with one nonprofit organization. Imagine if some of the other nonprofit organizations who would like to also have an education program and use the public land were able to have students come from underserved communities and schools for field trips within their watershed, because this is their watershed, the Ballona watershed. So it's an inconsistency, and we're not going to have public access for at least 10 years. That's if they move forward right away. It's going to take that long. But there are gates, there are plans for an interim access plan. There are gates and benches in Area A to allow the public in. So it's really an inconsistency to claim they need to do the project in order to have access. Nonsense. People are going up and down the bike lanes on the Ballona flood control channel. They could open up the south side, so separate the bikes right now from the walkers. There's recently opened a Park to Playa trail that comes all the way from the Baldwin Hills. There's plenty of opportunity right now. And so I would say, can't we have a facilitated forum of all the interested stakeholders, including Indigenous tribal stakeholders, state and federal agencies, nonprofits, and the public, as well as consulting scientists if they want to attend. We would have to agree to things such as the same representative throughout the process so that you don't start over again each time like Groundhog Day. It's a process, and it's a time-consuming process. And stakeholders would agree within that meeting what comes out of the meeting is a common message and developed by the nonpartisan facilitator and agreed to by the stakeholders, and that's what goes out. So work through the science to consensus and work together for consensus and not fighting amongst ourselves. And there's some day-to-day rules of working together in this way. And I know I've done this, I've lived through this. It's a very interesting process and it works. But people have to come together to create a problem-solving environment. So problems, disagreements are to be solved rather than to be battles that are to be won. And you have to listen openly and discuss issues with others who hold diverse views. Refrain from ascribing motives or intentions to other participants. That's a hard one, but we can do it. Respect the integrity and value of other participants. And then you honor time, so we don't go on and on, like I'm trying to honor time tonight. Use conversational courtesy. Appreciate humor, but do not engage in humor at the expense of others. And keep your cell phone silent during meetings. This is just an outline from another group I worked with in the Owens Valley. Very contentious process when it started, but working together, many of the factors in the habitat work group that I was in have come to consensus on planning and operations of the dust control for habitat and wildlife. It was a 3 or 4 year process, so I don't take this work on lightly. I don't suggest you do, but it's a way, because right now it's not working, in my opinion. So I have some ideas. Of course, I would come into such a facilitated working group with ideas, but I'll work together, and I would hope others would want to take this on if we could get such a consensus planning group together. Thank you.